Wunderbar. Yes, my friend, what should we talk about today?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Oh, right. I thought I might be coming.
Is it right that they bring a vote of no confidence in him today?
In who?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Who's bringing a vote of no confidence?
Jewish contingent. I read a headline. They're going to bring a vote of no confidence against Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I mean, you've answered your own question there, though, haven't you? You know my answer to that, so that's a bit of a trick question. It's always better, in a way, to have questions that are non-rhetorical. You know, I mean, you know my answer to that. There's been endless campaigns against Corbyn. You know, there still will be. Why? Because ultimately they think that Corbyn is a threat to the establishment. And that's why, for example, the Conservative Party are freaking out now, because Corbyn's suddenly meeting with Theresa May, discussing X, Y and Z. And they say, what are we doing talking to a Marxist who's making pretensions for number 10? And the only reason they're bothered about him going into number 10 and discussing was because they think maybe psychologically that's bad, because if he's already going into number 10, well, it's only one step away from him being at number 10. And already the pictures start looking a bit more prime ministerial. And I think that's the only real advantage he's going to get out of it, but that's what's going on, you know. So, anyway, I'll leave that one aside, eh? And the next question? Questions and contributions. Actually, the other day they had a question and contribution when we did the Speaker's Corner a few weeks ago, and it went all right, and they put down questions and answers, and it went okay. You know,
should religion be so powerful that it can bring down a democracy, like Jeremy Corbyn, for example? And they're not using democracy as a tool to quash that intellectual thought and political ideology, and instead just using their religion as a institution, a tool to undermine democracy and destroy.
A bit rhetorical again.
Destroy.
Not that I disagree with you, but a bit rhetorical.
All right. The question
but
is.
But if you took the wider
should religion.
If you took the wider first question, I think that's an interesting question.
All right.
And it's one I have to ponder. I mean, there are quite a few countries in which religion still plays a very powerful role in society. And therefore it is perfectly true that you have effectively a lobby of religious interests, which, for example, in Brazil, Bolsonaro, it's said that a lot of his support came from born-again Christian sects. And it's the same with the right wing in the United States of America, that they've often had a sort of a mobilizing force associated with religiosity rather than with political, ideological and so on. However, it is also worthwhile noting that rationality, although a lot of people would like rationality and logic to be the foundation for political debate, it's not really what governs political debate. Take the Brexit debate or take Trump and this sort of thing.
It should be though.
Maybe.
Wow. Definitely.
Well, yes, definitely you say, but I mean, it's like Kyle over there. He's saying, he made a big talk a minute ago about climate change. Now, there is a lot of talk about that, particularly since the school strikes have started and so on. Myself, I have an inclination to be weary of the question. Now, I know there are a lot of people who will say climate change denier, which I'm not, but at the same time, I'm very reluctant to adopt a position on something I don't know all that much about. I have done that in my life, and there's a great thinker, Marxist thinker, who would be great, Marxist thinker, Antonio Gramsci, and he said that most people adopt their attitudes towards the world based on what they call common sense thinking. And the common sense thinking means not that they themselves have investigated and understood the question properly. Instead of this, and there are many questions that are complex, detailed, and so instead of this, what they do is they look at certain individuals, figures in politics or in cultural life or intellectuals, and then they align themselves with their views. And so if, for example, someone's a Brexiteer, and maybe you're anti-Brexit, and you discuss with that person who's a Brexiteer, that Brexiteer might come out with arguments that you think, you might go away from that person and say you're a bloody idiot. But that person walks away from you and thinks, I may not have won the argument, but I'm right. And when they do so, they can't justify it on the basis of what they said themselves, but what they can do is they can say, if Nigel Farage was up against you, he'd make mincemeat of you. And so they abdicate the intellectual struggle to deal with that question themselves to someone who they think may be more competent in arguing the case, and certainly would be, and it's perfectly true, if you put me on the question of Brexit against Jacob Rees-Mogg, will I wipe the floor with Jacob Rees-Mogg? Probably not.
I would hope so. The guy's a moron.
Well, you say that.
I know that.
But I've watched him, and I don't think he's a moron at all.
He's capable of saying clever words.
I know. Well, but that's
capable
the
of
point.
saying clever words doesn't indicate intelligence. It just indicates the illusion of intelligence.
Can he formulate his arguments around the issues being discussed? Like this morning, I said to someone, before I came up here, I said, I don't like to come up to Speaker's Corner and to discuss Brexit. For the very simple reason that one is...
Same here.
I've got my general view about the question. But for example, if someone turns around to me at Speaker's Corner and says, have you read Theresa May's Brexit agreement, which is 580 pages or something, and I'd have to answer you, and I assume that 80% of the audience at Speaker's Corner or more would also have to answer in the same way and say, I haven't read the document. And if that's the case, then someone like a lawyer or a barrister who has read it inside out, like Jeffrey Cox, stands up at Speaker's Corner and takes you on, they're going to run rings around you.
Yeah.
Just the same as if you go to court. When I went to court last year, you came along. When I went to the High Court, in the High Court, I had a barrister. Actually, in the end of the day, I decided I knew more about the case than the barrister did. But had I tried to represent myself, I would have been crushed more rapidly than had I not tried to represent myself, had I had a barrister. Because the barristers only recognise, and the QCs and the judges only recognise each other as speaking partners.
Yeah.
Now, if the question was the subject of my PhD, in other words, China and China's political economy, I think I could probably wipe the floor with every single member of Parliament in Britain and every journalist in Britain. But if the question comes on to the Brexit agreement, I must say that I would try and divert the subject onto my own terrain, because I know that I don't know enough about the details to be able to sit there and argue these points.
Yeah, I
And
don't
so all
disagree
I
with
can
that at all.
do is say
But
how I would like to
moron.
frame the argument differently. But I can't actually engage in the detailed arguments. And because every Tom, Dick and Harry now has become quite familiar with the details of one or other aspect of Brexit, I try and avoid the subject. Not because I don't know anything about it or don't have an opinion, but because I find it's gone into that sort of legalistic depth that conceals more than it reveals.
I think it's very interesting, like you mentioned, people like Morgan, obviously Boris Johnson, people like that. Yes, they are capable of exquisite word construct, but that's not what makes someone right or wrong. What makes them right and wrong is what they believe in fundamentally. So the way you challenge someone of intellect like that is by ignoring the crap and going straight to the root of that. That's how I do it. And interact.
Well,
Being a speaker
I mean, I'm not denying that things
you
that
can defeat him like that.
things that do very well, for example, in question time or something like that, when the audience members are invited to say one or two things, and one of them succinctly attacks a Tory, for example, and says, catches the few words of error that they make or insensitive words that they state. Someone, if they're quick on the mark, can make a comment that undermines the political figure. And that, of course, everyone will cheer and shout. They won't cheer and shout because the depth of the argument has been dealt with. They'll cheer and shout because we've got one over on them. And I automatically, the members of the audience who are siding and clapping alongside, automatically sense, here's a chance to have a go at that toff, right? Or have a go at that figure of hatred that I've got. So the point being, politics is not actually about the details of the rational argument.
True.
It's about interests
Yes.
and how they're aligned in society.
But
And the consequence of that is we abdicate responsibility to great figures, to great thinkers or articulate individuals who apparently can express that on your behalf, on behalf of one interest group or another interest group.
We can't-
That's why we have the type of people that we have dominating debate in British
I
politics.
completely agree on that one.
Right.
But we must definitely have an environment where people are actually questioned and analysing what they really stand for, not the one-off issue that they really stand up for. Like Morg is a fundamental far-right lunatic, and whatever he says must be challenged. But furthermore, it should never be not dropped into the conversation. Just how insane that man is. That should always be the dominant force.
I
in
don't
that.
see why that's the case, though. I mean, I'm sorry. I know there are a lot of people who argue that, and I might not curry favour by disputing what you say. But I often watch his comments. If I'm looking up something on Brexit, I try my best, despite feeling sick to the core every time I hear the word Brexit. I try my best to follow some of what's going on. And when I do so, I will look up Nigel Farage, I will look up Rees-Mogg, I will look up a couple of the Labour members, and I will look up a couple of the television reports. But I spend as little time as possible on it, but I take the sort of counterposed polls because I think that gives me some inkling of what's going on. Having said that, this week I watched this programme. Anybody watch that programme by Laura Koonsberg about Brexit? I must say that was an eye-opener for me. It was an eye-opener for me because I assumed that as someone who had gone around from politician to politician during the last months and got access to everybody, that she would know something. And when I watched her programme, I was astounded, absolutely astounded at how utterly empty and vacuous her entire analysis was. It was astounding. When she got on to Boris Johnson, I think the key word she used was, this was like 8 months of studying it from the inside. All she said was, Boris just wants to be loved. That was it. For God's sake, this is the #1 British journalist on politics. And that's all she could say. It
probably
was
sleep
quite
with him.
astounding. And I was watching, I thought something's going to come now. No, it was from one simple stupidity to the next. And then the other thing was they do this thing doorstepping. So she showed how that worked. And it basically was her with a microphone. She knows that someone's coming out of number 10. She knows they're not going to say anything. And she shouts out at them, Prime Minister, what's going to happen today? Knowing they're not going to answer. And then they spend 15 seconds of her running after a car, right? Going, Prime Minister, what are you going to say? And that's what they broadcast on telly. And I started making videos, editing videos about the year 1998. And shortly after learning how to edit videos, I really lost interest in television. Because when you see how you can cut videos, you understand how news is presented, how stories are presented, how lies are created. It's a story they're spinning to you. But with the news, I was so astounded by watching that. Really, it was a shock. The only good thing about Brexit in the last period was when I watched that demonstration outside in Whitehall on the 29th of March. And I saw in the news, I thought, oh my God, I thought, Tommy Robinson is organising the UKIP platform. I thought, my God, a year ago, he was up here with his thugs pushing me around. And now he's in front of Whitehall, standing at the leadership of UKIP, right? And he's not even a member. I thought, my God, that's a dangerous situation. Lucky for us, Yaxley Lennon is a moron. He's such a moron that he wasn't able to capitalise on that event. Suddenly there he was, the issue of the day for British nationalists, the betrayal of the people. And what does he do? He goes to Whitehall, he starts attacking Muslims, Muslim paedophile gangs, his usual nonsense, forgetting the fact that one of his own comrades was just put in prison for paedophilia, right? Forgets about that. And then he stands there and goes on about Muslim grooming gangs, doesn't know when to stop, keeps on ranting because he's got a crowd in front of him. And then he turns around and says to the audience, and I think, thank God for that, what a moron. He turned around and he goes, now. I mean, he's got thousands of people in front of him. He's got an audience on the biggest issue in Britain for decades, on the day when we're supposed to be leaving the European Union. And what does he do? He goes, watch my 1 hour video. I thought, thank God for that. What a moron. What an absolute idiot. And I thought, well, that's all right then. Fascism is 10 years away then, instead of 5 years. I mean, I don't mean extreme as that, but in any case.
But seriously, what about the rise of ethno-nationalism?
Well, it's a monstrosity.
Well, of course it is. But seriously, people like him, moronic though he is appealing to that mindset.
Oh, I'm not denying that. That's why I was so worried. I was genuinely scared when I thought, my God, UKIP's been taken over by Tommy Robinson. And then you see what an idiot he is. You think, oh, fuck, thank God for that. Thank God he's an idiot.
Don't see it that way.
Sorry?
He was that speech.
They saw him.
But the problem is this. Now that's fine, but my worry was this: the UKIP supporters. I mean, a few years ago, UKIP was the biggest vote in the European elections, the biggest party.
If we have European elections, who could you be?
Now, my worry was that his appeal would go beyond the sort of, ugga-mugga, no-neck unibrows that we get up here, and would suddenly reach out to a much wider layer of the population on the basis of Brexit. If he moves on from, Muslim paedophile rape gangs onto Brexit is betrayed, he might get somewhere. And that would be extremely dangerous.
But he hasn't done that, but Farage has. And Farage...
I'm less worried about Farage.
Well, Farage and he, they're part of the rise of ethno-nationalism.
Well, yes and
Farage
no.
is the respectable, the nice
Yes,
beer drinking,
yes, that's true. But that is a generic, I agree with you, but that is a generic international process of the rise of nationalism. It's happening in America, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in France. These yellow vests are not only like protesters for the people, it's also a nationalist tinge to it. In Germany, you've got the AfD. They're the second biggest party in Parliament now.
And Rees-Mogg quoted them.
Well, to be fair, again, I think that's hysterical, the way some people reacted to that. The actual because what do? How far do you go with a politically correct argument? Because, for example, if you want to make a documentary about the 20th century, you'd be pretty hard pushed to make a documentary without featuring Adolf Hitler. Does that mean that you should, because you don't agree with Adolf Hitler, you should never broadcast anything that Adolf Hitler ever said?
But he wasn't making a documentary. He was making a political point by referring to the far right in Germany on a point which he agreed with.
But to be fair, what that Dr. Weiner, whatever her name is, said was actually correct. What she said was correct. I didn't share it, but I watched it. What do you want me to do? Because I don't agree with her, not watch it? I watched Tommy Robinson's video on Pandorama, right? I've watched hours of it. I've watched so many hours of his video to get to know what he's arguing that I get feeds from YouTube seem to think I'm on the far right. And I get all these Nazi videos being pushed to me, right? Because I watch his videos.
That's not my point.
It is the
That's not
point.
my point.
I can't say that I will watch that
no,
and then turn around to others and say you shouldn't watch
That's
it.
not my point. My point is that I'm not saying that Rees-Mogg shouldn't have gone and checked this person's opinion. I'm suggesting that a person in the Tory party that's supposedly on a respectable end of British politics quoting a clear far-right party is a new development. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, but I mean, is it so significant? If someone puts out a statement that you happen to agree with, well,
Because
sometimes it will be the case that you will, it's the internet age as well. You click share and you share it.
Yeah. And what's being shared?
To be fair,
what's being shared is opinions from extreme people, and it's people like Farage and
because
Rees-Mogg who quote these people, who suggest then they're respectable. You can be brought into the centre of reasonable politics. That's
it doesn't automatically follow. And I don't know what reasonable politics is. If you watch
the
British
Labour Party.
Well, but look, you and I know that we disagree about these questions. As far as you're concerned, I'm an extremist.
No.
And as far as you're concerned, Jeremy Corbyn's an extremist.
Bound by Labour Party rules.
I'm not bound by I'm bound. What do you mean I'm bound by Labour? I'm standing up here and say what I think, right? If the Labour Party doesn't like it and someone wants to expel me, well, then they will. The only reason I don't get expelled because no one's gone through all my videos from the past. If they want to find something there to keep me out on, one day they will. And I have been expelled before for allegations that were totally false. So I'm not all that bothered by that.
Can I ask you something about the footage of the soldiers in Afghanistan shooting Jeremy Corbyn's?
Yeah.
That, along with the general who a few years ago threatened to commit a mutiny against Corbyn. Are we on the road to some kind of fascist?
No, it's
state?
typical
Well,
power.
that doesn't make it fascist.
I'm not trying to be
But
hysterical.
obviously, the idea of shooting Jeremy Corbyn as a target practice is a bit unfortunate for those people. And I think there is quite a wide layer within the British Army who have that type of attitude. I think there is quite a wide layer who think like that. And that's why when Robinson stood with these soldiers and took a photograph, that they were so keen to take the photograph. Having said that, I don't think those soldiers who took a photograph with him should have been fired from the army.
Really?
No, I don't think
You
so.
don't think shooting the head of Her Majesty?
No, I didn't say that. I said you didn't listen to what I said. I said those who had a photograph with Tommy Robinson,
That's fine.
right? They were kicked out of the army,
That's wrong. Yeah.
and I don't think that's right.
What about the guys shooting the picture of Corbyn?
No, I think they should be kicked out of the army. I think they should be kicked out of the army for that, yes. But having said that, I think that's quite a widespread... I mean, you're right that ultimately what this reveals is the way in which the state is not a neutral force. And of course, one of the problems that Corbyn has had throughout the whole period of him being leader of the Labour Party is that the state has many tentacles. And the tentacles can spread from the intelligence agencies, or the so-called intelligence agencies, the army, the police force, the judiciary. But it also means the monarchy, the House of Lords, and most of the members of Parliament. And within the members of Parliament, most of the members of the Labour Party in Parliament, who are tied in because of their historical evolution to the apparatus of the existing system. And therefore, they consider the party to have been hijacked by a group of ultra-left
Can I
lunatics.
ask another question? Well, those tentacles of the state, they helped to bring down Harold Wilson, didn't they? Do you think that might happen to Corbyn again?
Oh, well, I'm absolutely certain that if there was a general election and Corbyn wins the election, one of the things that will happen shortly afterwards is this chicanery we're seeing in Parliament at the moment, where the members of Parliament suddenly declare, Chuka Umuna, suddenly declare, I've got a conscience. No conscience when he's bombing Iraq, but suddenly he's got a conscience. And who's this, Anna Soubry, is it? Joined with them. She suddenly, when the Tories are carrying out God knows what against the people, no conscience. Suddenly she's got a tremendous conscience. And then, what they've done now is they've said, the crisis is so severe in British society that all members of Parliament must act independently of the whip. Now that's not just about Brexit. What it is about is this. If there's an election in 5 weeks' time or in 6 months' time, and suddenly Corbyn is put into number 10, they're two ifs, but if they're valid ifs, all of a sudden you will discover that half of the members of the Labour Party in Parliament will discover their conscience cannot possibly agree with Jeremy Corbyn. And therefore they will decide that on some policy issue that they decide they cannot possibly agree with him on, then they will turn around and say, now we're going to make an agreement like we had under Theresa May. When we couldn't agree with her, we decide what happens instead of the government, that they will do the same thing again.
So you're predicting half the Labour Party will leave?
I'm predicting that about 100 to 150 members of the parliamentary Labour Party will side or will oppose Jeremy Corbyn's government by one means or another.
By leaving? By retiring?
They will try to sabotage and they will try to take over the Labour Party. But if they fail, then they may do manoeuvres like what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, whereby the parliamentarians with a conscience will get together to oppose these terrible mad policies of this terrorist sympathiser Jeremy Corbyn. That's how I think they'll behave.
And he wants a dictatorship.
By what?
Corbyn.
I fear I'm describing what I think will happen.
Parliamentary Labour Party sabotaging democracy in this country.
What he's describing is Jeremy gets into power.
I would prefer
get his own way on everything. It's called democracy.
I would prefer that instead of reaching this point, that before a general election happens, every single Labour Party constituency should have an election to decide who their candidate is.
That wasn't voted
for
on
Parliament.
at the last Labour Party
I said
conference.
I believe
I know.
that's what should
And
happen.
you remember the Labour Party, and the Labour Party decided that they wouldn't even debate that on the floor of the conference.
Right.
We discussed it
But
at the time.
this is what I believe.
Fine.
You know, you're asking me. I'm at
But
Speaker's
you know, as a
Corner.
Labour Party member, it's
When
not
I
going to
stand at
happen.
Speaker's Corner, I give my view.
Obviously.
I'm not a party hack.
Obviously.
I'm not a party machine. I'm not a party mouthpiece. I consider myself a revolutionary Marxist who happens to be in the Labour Party. And as such, I
the Labour
advocate
Party isn't
those
going to do
policies
it.
that I have advocated pretty much quite consistently for the past 32 years,
And no one's
33
listening
years
in the
at
Labour
Speaker's
Party.
Corner.
There's been a smattering of revolutionary Marxists in the Labour Party for 100 years, ever since the very beginning.
Yes.
Why have they?
have they
Why has
failed?
Labour never
Why have
really
they
shown
failed?
any signs of becoming revolutionary and going with that tendency? I'm quite curious. They've worked so hard.
The unions.
They've only succeeded in creating new parties, in separating and bringing people to.
For the same reason we have got a crisis in Britain today, the crisis in the Labour Party is a manifestation of that, and the historical evolution of the Labour Party is a manifestation of that. The British capitalist class was the most successful capitalist class from about 1780 to about 1920. And the consequence of that was that British imperialism, by which I mean capitalism, in Britain expanded its field to the entire planet. And because it had this global reach and the mechanisms for accumulation, which went into the hands of the financiers and bankers who control British society and the political... We've heard you. You said theft 4 times.
He's making a point through repetition.
Theft is one word you could use for it, but I don't believe it is adequate to explain it.
They did.
Because theft is a morally loaded term.
And rape isn't. Sorry, theft is morally loaded, but rape isn't.
That's not what he said. That's not what he said. Come on.
But
Yeah, but he
meaning
said
what?
rape and theft.
Rape,
Oh, I
theft,
didn't
pillage,
hear
and
him
murder.
say the rape. Sorry.
It's like George
Speak
Orwell
up, man.
So-
Speak up.
So, the key point being that because British capitalism gained an enormous amount of resources from the rest of the planet, they were able to use some of those resources to give concessions which were able to pacify the workers' movement and the Labour Party. The consequence of that was that the Labour Party, rather than advocating what it did in 1918, at the 1918 Labour Party conference, there was just after the Russian Revolution, one of the first things that was shouted out from the podium was, "Three cheers for the Russian Revolution, 3 cheers for Lenin and Trotsky." And the whole audience erupted in cheers for Trotsky, Lenin and the Russian Revolution.
That was then. It's over,
However,
man. It's over.
however, once the Labour Party came to power in 1924, they were sabotaged. The government was brought down by a series of lies published in the Times newspaper, revolving around something called the Zinoviev letter, in which they asserted, it was a lie, a deliberate smear, in which they asserted that the Russian Bolsheviks were controlling the Labour Party.
They weren't.
So there's a long tradition. It was a complete lie. It was a falsified, the Zinoviev letter. It was a complete lie. But that brought down the first Labour government. And thereafter, the next Labour government was a coalition government. Ramsay MacDonald left the Labour Party and joined the coalition. And then the Second World War, there was another coalition government. And only in 1945 did Labour come to power with its own mandate and a majority. But of course then they came under pressure to maintain the existing order of power. They did carry out radical reform, but it was never revolutionary change. So Britain has the peculiar history whereby its Workers' Party never actually adopted Marxism as its dominant philosophy. Unlike the Germans, unlike the French, unlike the Spanish, unlike the
And
Swedes,
what happened in those countries?
in all those countries you had social democracy, which was
Civil war.
a Marxist party. Well, I mean, there were many reasons why there were civil wars in those countries.
we escaped
But
the civil
all of
war.
those countries,
That's an argument in favour
all of
of
those
the
countries
Marxist
had a Marxist party, which was the main workers' party. That includes the French Socialist Party, the German Social Democratic Party, and so on. They were all Marxist parties, in name at least, in any case. And the British Labour Party was never a Marxist party, either in name or in deed. So that's the historical distinction between the Labour Party and the other social democratic parties in Europe. But I believe that may well change, and the last shall be first, and the first shall be last, as they say.
good.
you know.
According to Jesus.
Well, no, but if you look at
The Bible.
if you look at Europe,
So resurrection. There's going
the
to be a
Labour
resurrection.
Party at present has the most radical leader in the whole of Europe.
But look at no. Look at the last manifesto. I'm sorry. Where were the really radical ideas? Nationalisation. We're going back to 1945. It's not even commanding heights of the economy. He wants to nationalise the electricity market. He wants to nationalise the railways. They're popular even with Tory middle-class commuters. Where was the radical idea there? Sorry, I missed it.
Well, it's a contextual question. You're correct in that. Formally, you're correct, but formality is only, if you like, one aspect of the question. Underneath the formality, there is the perception. And the perception is, within the establishment in Britain and amongst the capitalist class, the perception is that Jeremy Corbyn represents some kind of dramatic revolutionary change. And to be fair, I've worked in one organisation or another, with like 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, alongside Jeremy Corbyn and John MacDonald for about 30 years.
And they all had revolutionary Marxist
and
front.
and they certainly are far more radical than
Yeah.
anything else the Labour Party has had in living memory.
But it's the policy that counts. And
Well, it
what's-
isn't actually the policy that counts.
The
enough.
the second in command of Corbyn has intimated that the ideas from the last manifesto will be included. So the nationalisations I spoke
I'm fine
about,
with that.
I don't hear anything that qualifies as really,
Okay,
really radical.
let me
It's
clarify.
centrist.
Let me clarify. As somebody who's been involved in Marxist politics for the whole of my adult life, since I was 17, my own view is this. We always used to adopt, I was in a group that was affiliated with or associated with the ideas of Leon Trotsky. And we used to have, there's a pamphlet written by Trotsky, and it's called The Transitional Program and the Tasks of the Socialist Revolution. And those of us, yes, that's right. He always made it's not as bad as Marx. Marx used to make some really catchy books. He had this one book called Against Bruno Bauer, and I can't remember the whole term. Sorry, I can't remember it now. It's a really weird, long, complex and unappetizing, but I can't remember it now.
Which you've
Sorry.
read and studied.
I haven't actually, but in any case. So Leon Trotsky said the following. He said, a revolutionary is not someone who advocates armed insurrection and the overthrow of the state. A revolutionary is someone who fights for every single reform, even the smallest reform. So one of the slogans of the revolutionaries in the transitional program by Trotsky was not a penny, sorry, not a penny, not a man for the imperialist war. Not a penny, not a man. So all they're saying is, don't give any resources to that. And yet that was a mechanism for mobilizing people around a simple demand that not everybody, but perhaps 80% of the population would support. And once you mobilize the people around that demand, then you can show people, look how the ruling class responds. And because they respond with violence, aggression, hysteria, that reveals to the people the way in which the balance of forces in society are arranged. You can see this with Jeremy Corbyn at the moment. Even just inviting Jeremy Corbyn for talks in Downing Street, whereby he is considered an equal partner to discuss the dynamics of Brexit, leads to a hysterical reaction on the part of Jacob Rees-Mogg and several other members of the Conservative Party in Parliament who say, you know, we've been pulling the shots on the Brexit debate. Now all of a sudden you're going to put a Marxist in number 10. Hysterical responses.
Predictable.
Now,
Predictable.
yes, and that's the reason why it is not just a question of what specific demands are raised. For example, in a period of economic downturn, and the latest report, if you look at the front page headline in the Financial Times today, the latest report is that the entire world economy is heading towards a new recession. Germany, industrial production is on the decline. In the United States, the economy is on the decline. Even in China, the economy is slowing down. And the consequence of that is, if it's correct that there is to be a new economic recession, is that simply to say to people, we want, for example, if you raise the demand in the labour movement, wages must be tied to a price of living index, and they must not fall below that. If you say to people, we want pensions to remain at the existing age, if you say to people, we want to guarantee that the existing rights of workers in relation to the working week, in relation to lunch breaks, in relation to stress at work and so on, all the rules and regulations of labour laws in Britain, if you say to the people, we will defend those to the hilt,
How are you going to pay for it?
that You see, this is what will be argued. And that will lead, if there is a clash, if that argument is put by the establishment, and Labour puts the other argument, we will not grant one attack against the workers. Not a second on the working day. Not a penny off the pay of the workers. A guaranteed increase of wages tied to the cost of living. If that is a demand that the workers' movement, the trade unions, for example, adopts, you are heading towards a direct clash and confrontation. An example of that, look at France. The dispute in France is not about the people with yellow vests demanding better living standards. It's about them saying, we do not want to lose what we've got. And therefore, sometimes in periods of economic crisis and of economic transition, it can be that simply trying to hold on to what you've got brings about a revolutionary crisis in society. And therefore, that answers your question about the manifesto.
You're always, I love the way you cut that off. But you're always trying to engineer.
It's a reasonable argument.
You're always trying to engineer a revolution.
He's a communist.
No, that's not correct.
That's how the scales will
If
drop
I
from
am
people's
saying-
eyes, the false consciousness.
If I am saying that to defend the existing living standards,
Which the